So in this segment, we're going to be discussing at least George Osborne and David Cameron were more honest about austerity than Sir Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves ever.
This was a government, of course, which ran saying that there would be no return to austerity. And yet, if one looks at the plans that are being laid out so far by Rachel Reeves, and certainly the tenor and rhetoric and tone of what Keir Starmer was saying earlier in the week, it's hard to escape the conclusion that we could be heading to an era, if not quite a full-blown, full-flat austerity, then certainly a semi-skimmed version of it. And I think that is potentially dangerous or problematic for Keir Starmer and the Labour government for a few reasons. One is that you try and do the George Osborne strategy of blaming the last lot and saying austerity is necessary without the support of the right-wing press. Difficult. That's something George Osborne and David Cameron had that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves certainly won't have. But
you also have the benefit of a media class who were very happy to, push the narrative of, it's all the last Labour government's fault. Of why all this bad stuff's happening. You had a media class who are very complicit in things like austerity. I don't think that's going to happen this time around.
More importantly, far more importantly, in fairness to Osborne, whatever you think about austerity, in fairness to him and Cameron, they ran on it in 2010. They went into the general election, they said, this is something we're going to do, not just because we believe it is necessary, and this is the second part, not just because we believe it was necessary, but because we actually believe to some extent that it is a good thing, that it is our theory of change. We think that if we reduce public spending, the private sector will get bigger because the public sector will get smaller, and then our economy will be fitter, leaner, better. It was their theory of change. You might disagree with it, and personally speaking, there's lots of things I disagree with it about, but it was nonetheless a theory of change. It was their vision, not only for how things were going to get worse in the short term, but actually how things would get better ultimately. Keir Starmer...
Narrators note that things did not get better.
Labour aren't saying that. They're saying they're going to have to make these decisions. But then what's plan B? And I think that's what Labour MPs increasingly going to want to hear.
What is the plan to grow the economy? That's the key question. I never thought I'd be kind of giving credit to Osborne and Cameron, but here we are. This is Danny Blanchflower, I'll call him Danny Drinkwater again, saying, I believe Starmer and Reeves were too smart to do austerity. It appears I was wrong. The UK is heading towards austerity 2.0. So this is an actual economist who is saying this. New governments usually come into office with an agenda to try and move on from the sorry past, but not this time. Last week, Starmer told the country things were worse than we imagined, and that the public should prepare for the short-term pain for long-term good. In other words, the government is preparing for unnecessary cuts. Defending the government was Lucy Powell, who we discussed, said cutting these payments was necessary to avoid a run on the pound. It wasn't. There was also no mention in Starmer's speech of the biggest destroyer of revenues and growth and one of the main causes of our sharp drop in living standards, Brexit. Reeves' October's budget won't help matters. What the Chancellor appears to be advocating is completely unnecessary and will slow the economy with spending cuts and tax increases. People didn't vote for this, despite the fact that you have the Labour goons saying that Labour aren't committing to austerity. Very much looks like there are. And this is an actual economist saying this, not just a physics guy or a guy who travelled a lot. A great example of how had to come to power with positive vision was Clement Attlee. Clement Attlee, someone I spoke about a lot. Osborne's response to the financial crash, in contrast, was disastrous. The former Chancellor's solution was to repudiate Keynes, who believed you could crowd in private sector investment by boosting public investment. Osborne did the opposite. He slashed public investment and spending based upon a mistaken belief that high debt to GDP ratios killed growth. The basis for this suggestion, acknowledged in his May's lecture of 2010, was a paper by US economists Carmen Reinhart and Kenneth Rogoff, who turned out later to contain a serious error. So this is a proper nerdy kind of piece that he's written here. As an economist, he probably would do. But austerity just is bad. If you want to read the full article here, I suggest you go for it. He does talk about here, I hope that while in opposition, Labour have done the hard work of analysing what could have been done to improve public services. I do recall on May 6th, 1997, days after Tony Blair won the general election, Gordon Brown and Ed Balls announced their plan to make the Bank of England independent. In contrast to Reeves and Starmer, they had done the hard work, preparatory work, and the move resulted in lowered cost of government borrowing. This is something I spoke about last year, actually, and 2 years ago, that why don't Labour just do the prep work now for some of these policies in order to get them off the ground really fast? With GB Energy, we still have no idea what it is. He says the question is now, why is Starmer and Reeves are idiotically trying to balance the budget. When COVID hit, the government borrowed easily. Why not do that again? The difference is the interest rates are much higher now, which is something Labour will argue. But again, I don't think that's much of an excuse. He says there are all kinds of options for funding public services, including the Treasury issuing a bond that the Bank of England buys that is quantitative easing used in the Great Recession, and which I voted for when I was a member of the Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee. So this guy, he's big dog. Did not realise this. I thought he's just a minor economist on Twitter, but no, he's a bigger figure than I would have anticipated. Because there's no reason to do it again to avoid painful and avoidable cuts. Investing in Britain is smart economics. Nobody told us we could do that. Would not be an excuse. So he's a professor of economics at Dartmouth College and was a member of the Bank of England's monetary policy back in 2006-2009. So again, he's big dog, and no one can say Labour didn't have a choice. Despite people claiming so, austerity is not the way to go. And this from Ollie Dugmore, just to kind of round off the segment. I found this clip quite cool.
I think it was underwhelming, unimpressive.
It's about Starmer's speech.
Dishonest.
Get off the fence, Ollie, why don't you?
I think if you're going to stand on a platform of change, it's basically the only word you heard from his lips over the course of the general election campaign, and as Nick said, then stand on essentially a George Osborne speech. It's not change. It's 14 years. It's extraordinary, the economic consensus established under the coalition government and then David Cameron's Tory party, the way that it's continued through. I don't necessarily think I would have expected a Labour government to adhere to the same economic thinking that they've apparently spent the last 14 years bemoaning.
So Rachel Reeves specifically bemoaned. Keir Starmer himself said austerity is not good. He said it doesn't work.
If Keir Starmer was sitting here right now, he might say, but look at the public sector pay rises we have just given above inflation in order to make sure we retain those staff and end the strikes.
Yeah, it's really peculiar.
That is a change.
Yeah, no, absolutely is. And the gap between the rhetoric and the actual action of the Labour government I find quite interesting. So when those pay rises came into force, it was the same day that Reeves gave that speech in the Commons before the recess. And
29th of July.
And what was the language she was employing, right? It's tough decisions, household budget. She barely mentioned the public sector pay rises. And I find it...
So I think there's two possible reasons for this. One is she's briefing for a budget that won't be as painful as she's making out it'll be. Or the second is she didn't want to give the impression that, the reason why they're making these cuts and these tough choices because they gave public sector pay increases, because the Tories and the media, the tabloids are already worrying with the idea that Labour have given in to their union bosses, hence why they've got all this money for pay rises but haven't got so for the average person. So that's, I think, the reason why Labour have gone down this road.
I find it quite peculiar that on the one hand, whilst they're doing this actually relatively progressive thing, and by the way, I reject the politics that says you have to choose between the pensioners and the workers and the public sector pay rises. I don't believe in playing voters or parts of the electorate.
Well, unfortunately, Rachel Reeves does not agree with that.
Off each other in that way. But it's really interesting, their action and the difference between what they're saying when they're speaking publicly. And I don't know where that comes from, whether it's media management, whether it's just a rhetorical game. It's quite interesting.
It is quite interesting. I think they're just, I've said it before. I've said it for the last 2 years now. Labour comms are a complete disaster. And, despite the fact that the Labour goons keep blaming the comms team for all their failures, the question is who hired the comms team? Who hires those people to make those decisions? The answer is it's the leadership of the Labour Party. So fundamentally, if you want to blame the comms team, you've got to blame the leadership for hiring these people. It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. You can't get away with blaming them forever. Labour keep making bad policy decisions in the knowledge of their comms team being a complete disaster, and that's on them. The fact that you have ministers talking about a run on the pound, if they don't get rid of the winter fuel allowance, complete economic malarkey, and yet Labour know that the people that they have put as ministers are complete goons and don't know how to structure good arguments. And so Labour, really, it's a twofold error. One, making the initial bad decision, and two, sending out people who really can't string a sentence together in order to defend themselves. Honestly, it just boggles belief that these people are in charge of this country. Yeah, they're better than the Tories, but by how much? How low is the bar you're willing to set for the Labour Party? That's the real question. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.